Francesca Keller yanked open the black SUV's back door with a frustrated sigh and threw herself into the seat. Finally, she muttered, brushing the rain from her coat. "You're late by 8 minutes and I'm about to lose my job." Dominic Vale blinked at her through the rearview mirror. "Excuse me." She didn't even look up. "Just drive. Midtown. 35th and Lexington. And please don't go the long way, I can't afford another surge fare." He turned fully in his seat. "I think there's been a mistake." She finally looked up, eyes wide with panic. "Oh my God, are you not my driver?" Dominic raised a brow, soaked hair falling slightly over his forehead. "No. But I can be." She blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" He shrugged, lips twitching. "You clearly need the ride. I've got nowhere to be. It's still pouring, and you look like you might cry if I say no." Francesca stared at this stranger. He was ridiculously handsome, dressed in a dark wool coat over a charcoal suit, no rideshare sticker in sight. His car didn't even smell like one, it smelled like leather and cologne and something expensive she couldn't name. "You're serious?" He nodded once. "Buckle up." She hesitated, then clicked her seatbelt. "You better not be a serial killer." Dominic grinned as he pulled into traffic. "Promise. Just a guy with a car and some free time." Why would any guy with a Benz and a tailored suit have free time at 8 a.m. on a Monday? He glanced at her with a shrug. "Maybe I just got back from a red-eye. Maybe I'm between meetings. Maybe I like rescuing women out of the rain." Francesca rolled her eyes but couldn't help the small smile creeping onto her lips. "Well, in that case, thanks." Dominic. Francesca. "But most people call me Frankie." "Nice to meet you, Frankie. You always jump into strange men's cars." "Only when I'm one late train away from getting fired," she said, pulling her damp hair into a claw clip. "And only when the strange man looks like he belongs in a GQ ad." Dominic let out a low laugh. "Flattery this early? Dangerous game." By the time he pulled up to her office building, she was laughing for real. "I owe you big time." "Coffee?" He tilted his head. "Now?" "No, I mean sometime. I'm a broke assistant, but I can swing a latte." He studied her face for a beat too long, then smiled. "I'll hold you to that." She opened the door, then paused. "You never answered why you were just driving around." "Maybe I was waiting for you," he said lightly, then nodded toward the building. "Go. You're already late." She hurried off, turning back once to wave. He was still watching her as he pulled away. Dominic didn't usually do reckless things. Not anymore. Not since his father died and left him Vale International, $100 million real estate empire and a legacy built on control, order, and zero distractions. But the chaotic woman in his back seat? She was a distraction he couldn't stop thinking about. He found out her last name within 24 hours. Hadn't been hard. They had a database of every leasing agency in the city. Francesca Keller, junior assistant at Lenox Row Property Management. Annual salary, laughable. But she was smart. Had a degree in urban planning and a portfolio that screamed potential. She just hadn't been given a shot yet. She reminded him of his mother, sharp, stubborn, and going broke trying to make it on her own. He showed up at the coffee place across from her office 3 days later. She nearly dropped her croissant. "You weren't kidding," she said, eyes wide. "You actually came." "I told you," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I always keep my promises." "Do you make them to all the women who think you're an Uber driver?" He laughed. "Only the ones with attitude." They talked for an hour. Then, too. He walked her back to her building, hands in his pockets, resisting the urge to touch her lower back. She was funny. Blunt. Kept calling him Mr. Mystery. He didn't tell her who he was. Not yet. He didn't lie, he just didn't mention that his last name was Vale. Or that he owned 3 of the buildings her company managed. Or that the watch on his wrist cost more than her monthly rent. He didn't want her to see the money, not yet. He wanted to know who she was when she wasn't trying to impress anyone. And Francesca? She was becoming the best part of his week. Their coffees turned into lunches. Walks in the park. Late-night talks in his car because her apartment was too tiny and his penthouse felt like too much. "You're weird," she said one night, curled up in the passenger seat with bare feet on the dash. "But like, the good kind. You listen. You don't look at your phone every 5 seconds. You pick the best music. You even let me pick the fries first. Dominic looked over at her, the city lights soft behind her face. You make it easy. She looked at him, then really looked. What do you do, Dominic? For real? You've avoided answering that question forever. He hesitated. Real estate. She smirked. Figures. You dress like someone who's always about to sell a skyscraper. He laughed, but his chest tightened. She didn't know yet, and he didn't know how to tell her. But he knew one thing for sure. He was falling for her. Fast. Hard. Without warning. And if she found out the truth too soon, she might walk away. Francesca stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the Lenox Tower with damp hair from another unexpected downpour and the unmistakable scent of burned coffee clinging to her coat. She was late again, and today of all days, she couldn't afford it. Frankie, the regional director, is already in the conference room, said Maya, the receptionist, lowering her voice. And your boss has that vein in her forehead. Perfect, Francesca muttered, hurrying toward the elevators. Guess I'll be updating my resume tonight. The elevator doors slid closed just as her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She ignored it. She already knew who it was. Dominic had a way of texting at the exact moment she was about to do something important, like walk into a meeting or attempt to breathe. She hadn't seen him in 4 days, which was a record since the rainy morning she'd hijacked his back seat. They hadn't made any plans. She'd been swamped with a new account, and he claimed to be traveling for work. But his absence had settled into her skin like a low hum, a strange, persistent awareness that something was missing. Inside the conference room, her boss, Monica, barely glanced up. Nice of you to join us, Keller. You're leading the Kingsley pitch. Let's hope you came prepared. Francesca took her seat as calmly as she could, flipping open her folder. She'd stayed up past midnight finishing the presentation notes, and the numbers were solid. But numbers didn't charm clients, confidence did. By the end of the meeting, the Kingsley rep was nodding, Monica was scribbling notes, and no one had screamed. A win. Later that evening, as she stood on the sidewalk outside her apartment building, Francesca reached for her phone and finally called him. You disappeared, she said when he answered. Didn't mean to, Dominic replied, his voice low and smooth. I was in Tokyo. What for? He paused. A client needed eyes on a property. Right? She said, toeing a crack in the pavement. Makes sense. You're a man of mystery with buildings to inspect across the globe. You sound annoyed. I'm not. I'm just realizing I barely know anything about you. You show up when I least expect you and vanish without warning. I'll make it up to you, he said. Tomorrow night. Dress nice. Define nice. Something that makes you feel like you own the room. She hesitated. Fine. But you're not picking me up in that car again. I'm not jumping into any more random vehicles. He chuckled. Fair enough. The following evening, Francesca stood in front of her closet feeling like a fraud. Her one pair of heels had a crack in the sole, her only decent dress still had a dry cleaning tag on it, and her makeup had dried out weeks ago. Eventually, she settled on a navy jumpsuit she'd bought on clearance last fall and a pair of borrowed earrings from Maya. When she stepped outside, Dominic was leaning against a sleek black car, different from the first one but just as intimidating. He wasn't in a suit this time. A dark cashmere coat hung open over a steel blue shirt, the cuffs casually rolled, revealing a watch that was probably worth more than her entire wardrobe. He looked up and for a second didn't say anything at all. You clean up well, he said finally. So do you, she replied, adjusting the strap on her bag. Where are we going? You'll see. She expected a restaurant, maybe a rooftop bar. She didn't expect to pull up to a private gallery where a valet opened the door and addressed Dominic by name. This can't be where we're eating, she said, stepping out. It's a charity showing, he replied. They're auctioning modern pieces to fund an arts program downtown. The food's inside. And you just happen to be on the guest list? I'm on the board. She blinked. You never mentioned that. You never asked. Inside, the space was lit with low amber light, casting shadows on the white walls and glass sculptures. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and a string quartet played somewhere in the background. Francesca kept her arms close to her sides, trying not to look like she'd wandered in from the wrong side of town. "Relax," Dominic said, touching the small of her back. "You belong here." "I'm wearing $20 shoes, Dominic." He leaned in. "No one's looking at your shoes." They wandered through the exhibits, Francesca asking questions about the artists, Dominic answering with ease. He never bragged, never dropped names. But it was clear everyone knew him and respected him. At one point, a woman in a red gown approached, her lips painted the color of crushed berries. "Dominic," she said smoothly, "I didn't know you'd be here tonight." "Celia," he nodded. "Didn't know you were back in the city." She turned to Francesca with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you are?" "Francesca," she said, holding out her hand. Celia barely touched it. "Nice," she said, then turned back to Dominic. "We should catch up sometime." "I'll let you know," he said, his tone polite but final. As she walked away, Francesca arched a brow. "Friend of yours. Used to be." "How used to be?" "Very." She tilted her head. "You always bring girls to charity galas where your ex is a fixture?" "Only the ones who make me forget she ever existed." She swallowed hard, pulse skipping. Later, over dessert served on a rooftop terrace lit by golden lanterns, Francesca looked across the table at him. "Why me?" Dominic set down his glass. "What do you mean? You could be with anyone. You clearly run in circles where people know which fork to use and wear designer gowns like it's nothing. Why are you spending time with a broke assistant who once tried to pay for lunch with quarters?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you don't pretend. Because you challenge me. Because you see the world like it's still full of possibilities, and that makes me want to believe that maybe it is." She stared at him, stunned. "You're not who I thought you were." "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." But he still didn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Because as much as he wanted to, he wasn't ready for her to see the full picture. Not until he knew she'd stay. Francesca stood frozen just inside the towering glass archway of what appeared to be a private event space carved out of a former bank vault. The ceilings were impossibly high, lined with arched gold molding and glittering chandeliers. Waiters in black vests circled with trays of cocktails she couldn't pronounce. And every guest looked like they had stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Dominic leaned close, his voice low near her ear. "I know it looks intense. Just stay with me." "I'm not worried," she said, keeping her tone light even as her heartbeat raced. "I've watched enough heist movies to blend in." He gave a short laugh, but his eyes were serious as he offered her his arm. She took it, and for a moment it felt like slipping into a different life, one that didn't involve budgeting by the hour or splitting groceries with her roommate. They made their way through the crowd, and she noticed the subtle shift in body language whenever Dominic passed. People straightened their backs. Conversations paused. A few glanced his way with a nod of restrained recognition. "Who are all these people?" she asked under her breath. "Developers. Investors. Some of them are on the board for the Midtown Restoration Project." She looked up at him sharply. "The same project Lenox Row is trying to get?" "That's the one." She stopped walking. "Dominic, you didn't bring me here because of Lenox, did you? This isn't some kind of play to get insider information." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "No, I brought you because I want you to see the world from a higher floor. That's all." "You're sure?" she asked, watching his face carefully. "I don't use people, Frankie. I might keep things close, but I don't lie. Not to you." She nodded slowly, still wary but unwilling to walk away. As they moved deeper into the room, a man in his 60s with sharp features and a navy suit stepped into their path. "Dominic," the man greeted, clasping his shoulder with familiarity. "Didn't think I'd see you tonight. I wasn't planning on attending, but I changed my mind." The man's gaze shifted to Francesca. "And this must be Francesca Keller," Dominic said before she could speak. "She's with Lenox Row." The man's brows lifted slightly. "Ah, I've heard of them. I'm just an assistant, she said quickly, her palms suddenly cold. Titles are temporary, the man replied. Talent isn't. He extended a hand. Arthur Langston. She shook it, trying to mask her surprise. Arthur Langston was one of the most influential property financiers in the city, the kind of man who could approve or kill a project with a single sentence. After he walked off, Francesca turned to Dominic, stunned. You knew he'd be here. I suspected, he said. I also suspected he'd be more inclined to talk after a glass of wine and a few compliments. You're ridiculous. And you're brilliant, he said. I just set the table. You did the rest. Later, as the evening dwindled and the crowd thinned, Dominic guided her to a quiet corner near the massive windows that overlooked the city skyline. The air between them felt charged thicker than it had before. She folded her arms across her chest. I don't get you. That's fair. You drop into my life out of nowhere, show up at the perfect time, disappear without warning, and then hand me a room full of people who could change my career with a handshake. Who actually are you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a slim envelope. I was going to wait, he said, but I don't think I can anymore. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a letterhead she recognized, the Vale Group, the same company that owned half the towers in Manhattan. Her eyes scanned the card. It wasn't a business card. It was an offer. Junior Development Associate, Midtown Revitalization Project, reporting to Dominic Vale. She looked up, stunned. You're the Vale? He nodded once, watching her reaction closely. You own the company that owns the building I work in? Yes. And the one we had the meeting in last week? That one, too. She took a step back, the envelope still in her hand. You let me go on and on about rent hikes and how corporate landlords are ruining the city, and you just sat there like you were some guy with a car and free time? You were being honest. And I wanted the truth. She shook her head. I don't know if I should be flattered or furious. Be both, he said. I deserve it. You think offering me a job makes this okay? No. I think offering you a job is the least I can do after lying by omission. She stared at him, torn between the rush of opportunity and the sting of betrayal. Why me? Why not just hire someone with a resume that doesn't come with a side of student loan debt? Because I've sat through 100 polished interviews and none of them made me care. You did without trying. You see things others don't. You talk like someone who still believes in fixing things, not just flipping them for profit. She let out a breath, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I hate that I want this. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. Then take it. And if you hate me, fine. But don't walk away from something you earned. Francesca looked back at the offer in her hands, then up at him. This changes everything. It doesn't have to, he said. We can pretend you met me tonight, that we started from here. She studied him, the man she thought she knew and the one he really was merging into one. I can't pretend. But maybe I can start over. His shoulders eased, just slightly. Then let's begin with the truth. She nodded once. Okay. Tell me something real. He hesitated, then said, I've never brought anyone to one of these events. Ever. Not even with my last relationship. You're the first person who made me want to be seen. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. I should hate you, you know? He gave a small, vulnerable smile. I'd understand if you did. She folded the envelope and slipped it into her clutch. I'll think about the offer. And us. I'll think about that, too. As they stepped out into the cold night, Dominic didn't reach for her hand. He just walked beside her, quiet and patient, as though he knew that the next move had to be hers. And she had no idea what it would be. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, the choices in front of her didn't feel like traps. They felt like beginnings. Francesca crossed the lobby of the Vale Group headquarters for the first time, not as a guest, but as an employee. It was a week later and she still couldn't quite believe it. The office tower was quiet at this hour, the floor polished to a mirror sheen beneath her heels. The receptionist gave her a warm smile and waved her toward the elevator without a word. Her name was already on the list. Inside the elevator, she checked her reflection in the brushed steel panels. Her new blazer still had a faint tag imprint from the consignment store, and her nerves were barely held together with caffeine and sheer will. But her chin lifted anyway. She was here, and she had earned it. The door opened to the executive floor. A woman with a headset greeted her and led her through a corridor lined with minimalist art and glass-walled offices. At the end stood a double door that opened into a space unlike anything she'd ever seen. Dominic was behind a long walnut desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He didn't look up until she stepped in. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." "I almost did," Francesca said. "Twice. But then I remembered what my rent looks like." He stood. "You're not going to regret this." "I'm not worried about the job," she said, walking toward the desk. "I'm worried about working with you. This thing between us, it doesn't exactly fit into a professional box." "I'm not asking you to put it in a box," Dominic said. "I'm asking you to be honest with me, even when it's uncomfortable." She folded her arms. "You sure you want that? Because I have a lot of opinions and most of them are loud." "I've noticed," he said. "That's part of the appeal. Flattery isn't going to make this easier." "I'm not trying to make it easy. I'm trying to make it real." Francesca hesitated, then nodded once. "Fine. But I'm not giving special treatment because we've kissed." His gaze held hers. "Understood. And for the record, I have no intention of using our personal connection to interfere with your work. You'll report to the Midtown team lead, not me. You'll earn your place, the way you always have." Her shoulders eased. "That's all I needed to hear." He stepped around the desk and offered his hand, not as the man who had held her close on a rooftop, but as the executive who ran the company. "Welcome to Vale Group." She shook it. "Let's not make this a habit. My palms sweat when I'm nervous. I'll keep that in mind." They didn't see each other for 2 days. Francesca was buried under orientation briefs, team meetings, and a crash course in zoning policy. She shared a desk pod with 2 other associates, one who wore noise-canceling headphones at all times, and another who drank celery juice and whispered every sentence. It was overwhelming, exhausting, and also oddly exhilarating. On the 3rd day, a calendar alert popped onto her screen. Site visit Midtown Project, 4 p.m. She didn't know Dominic would be there until she walked into the construction shell of the upcoming development and found him standing next to a structural engineer, sleeves rolled again, a white hard hat tucked under his arm. "You're late," he said. "I was told 4 o'clock. It's 4:02. She rolled her eyes. "Are you going to be this annoying every time we're on the same site?" "Probably. The tour lasted an hour." She asked questions, took notes, and didn't let herself look at him once unless it was absolutely necessary. Afterward, as she was about to leave, he caught her elbow and pulled her aside behind a stack of drywall. "Hey," he said. "You did well today. Langston mentioned your notes from the last walkthrough." He was impressed. She blinked. "He remembered me?" "He remembered everything. You stood out." She looked at him, something tightening in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me you'd be here?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like I was checking up on you. And now I'm realizing I don't like being this far away from you." Francesca exhaled slowly. "This is complicated. It doesn't have to be. I'm not going to be someone you sneak behind columns with," she said plainly. "Then don't be," Dominic said. "Let's stop sneaking." Her heart pounded. "You'd be okay with that? People knowing? I've been building towers for 10 years. But you're the first thing I've wanted to build a future with." Her breath caught. "That's not fair. You don't get to say things like that when I just started this job." "I'm not asking for an answer. I'm asking for a chance." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not yet. But that night, she found a small box inside her work bag. No note. Just a card tucked beneath the lid. Inside was a sleek metal pen with her initials engraved in gold. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive looking. But it was hers. And he'd noticed she'd been borrowing cheap ballpoints all week. The next morning, she found him in the break room pouring coffee. "You always show up before sunrise?" "Only when I can't sleep." She stepped closer. About yesterday. He set the pot down. You don't have to explain. I want to. He waited. I'm not ready for all of it. But I don't want to pretend it's not there either. So if you're okay with going slow, I'll go at whatever pace you set. And if I decide I want to stop, then I'll stop. She lifted the cup from his hand and took a sip. This is terrible. It's the intern's blend. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. She smiled. You're a mystery, Vale. Not anymore. They didn't kiss. Not then. But when she walked out, he followed a few steps behind. Not close enough to crowd her. Just close enough to remind her he was still there. 3 months later, Francesca stood in the same gallery where he'd taken her that first night. Only now, she wasn't wearing borrowed earrings or wondering if she belonged. She walked in with confidence, her ID badge clipped to her clutch, a project proposal in her hand, and a man beside her who no longer kept secrets. Dominic wrapped his arm around her waist and leaned down. You ready for this presentation? She nodded. I've got this. You always did. When the meeting ended, Langston clapped her on the back and Dominic pulled her aside. I have something to show you. He led her up a narrow staircase to a balcony overlooking the city. A small table had been set for 2 white tablecloth, champagne flutes, and a view that stretched from the park to the river. She stared. What is this? A celebration. For what? For you. For us. For saying yes. She turned. I haven't said yes yet. I mean the other yes. He reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet box. Her breath froze. I fell for you the second you climbed into my car and demanded I drive like my life depended on it. I didn't know who you were, but I knew you were going to change everything. He opened the box. Inside was a ring delicate, timeless, and unlike anything she'd seen before. I'm not asking you to say yes tonight, but I'm asking you to think about it. Really think about what we could be. She stared at the ring, then up at him, her chest full and aching. I don't need time, she said finally. I've already thought about it. He froze. You're sure? She took the box from his hand and slid the ring onto her finger. I'm sure. He exhaled like it was the first full breath he'd taken in weeks. Then he pulled her into him, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't tentative. It was everything they hadn't said, everything they'd risked, everything they'd chosen. And when she pulled back, she whispered, I still think you're a terrible driver. He laughed against her cheek. Good thing I don't need to drive anymore. I've already arrived. They stood together as the city lights flickered on below. No more pretending. No more hiding. Just 2 people who had started in the wrong seat and found the right place together. The late autumn wind swept across the rooftop terrace, carrying with it the scent of roasted chestnuts from the street vendors below. Francesca stood at the edge, her arms resting on the stone ledge, the city sprawling out beneath her. The ring on her finger caught a glint of the setting sun, casting a delicate shimmer across the back of her hand. Behind her, Dominic was on the phone, handling what sounded like a last-minute crisis with a contractor in Barcelona. His voice was calm, deliberate, but she could hear the tension beneath it. It was the same tone he used when he was trying to make something fall quietly into place without anyone noticing the effort it took. She turned slightly and caught his eye when he finally ended the call. Everything okay? She asked. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. Just a delay. One of the permits hit a snag. Nothing we can't fix. She raised a brow. You say that like you're not secretly 2 seconds from flying to Spain to handle it yourself. I was actually, he said, stepping toward her. But then I remembered I promised you dinner. Her lips curved. You'd cancel an international trip for risotto? I'd cancel a merger for risotto with you. You're getting dangerously good at this romance thing. I'm an overachiever, remember? They sat down together at the table, where a chef was plating the final course from a mobile kitchen Dominic had arranged on the lower level. The entire rooftop had been transformed, string lights hanging above them, a small jazz trio playing near the far corner. It was indulgent and private and perfect. As they ate, Francesca's gaze kept drifting to the skyline. You ever think about what it would be like if we hadn't met that day in the car? I try not to, Dominic said, because I don't like that version of the story. I probably would have ended up finding another job eventually, she said, twirling her fork. But I don't think I would have known what I was capable of. He leaned forward. You've always known. You just needed someone to stop talking over you long enough to let you prove it. I was terrified when I walked into your office the first day. You didn't show it. I was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small just to look a little taller. He laughed. I noticed. And you didn't say anything? I figured if you could survive the kind of pain with a straight face, you were tough enough for anything. They finished their meal with shared bites of tiramisu, and when the music slowed, he stood and offered his hand. Dance with me. There's no one else out here. Exactly. She took his hand and let him pull her close. His arms settled around her waist and hers found their way to his shoulders. The city moved below them, lights blinking on one by one like stars falling into place. I never thought I'd fall in love on accident, she said softly. You didn't, he replied. You just didn't recognize it right away. She tilted her head. And you did. I knew the minute you bossed me around from my own back seat. She smiled into his chest. So what now? We live, he said. We build things together. You keep telling me when I'm being an arrogant idiot and I keep making you late for work with surprise breakfasts. Sounds messy. It will be. I like messy. They stayed like that until the music faded and the lights around them dimmed. There was no rush to leave. No deadline looming. Just the quiet certainty that they'd both found something they didn't know they were missing. 2 years later, the Midtown revitalization project was complete. Francesca stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony in a crisp cream blazer, her name stitched into the corner of her badge not as an assistant but as a lead consultant. She'd overseen every inch of affordable housing integration, fought for every green space, and negotiated community partnerships that would ripple across the borough for decades. Dominic stood beside her in a navy suit, his hand resting lightly at her back as the mayor offered congratulations and flashbulbs went off like fireworks. After the ceremony, they slipped away from the crowd and into the community garden nestled between the new buildings. The first daffodils were starting to bloom and the benches were already worn from use. We did it, she said, brushing a speck of dirt from her blazer. You did it, he corrected. I just signed the checks. You built the foundation. You built the future. She turned to him. You know, I used to think love was about grand declarations. Fireworks, speeches, dramatic moments. But it's this, isn't it? It's showing up. Every day. It's you standing next to me, not in front of me. And you standing with me, not behind me. They kissed beneath the branches of a young maple tree, the sounds of the city softened by distance and time. That evening, they returned to the rooftop, this time, not dressed for business or events. Just themselves. Comfortable. Quiet. Home. He poured them 2 glasses of wine and handed her a small envelope. What's this? She asked. Something overdue. She opened it to find a folded sheet of paper. At the top was the logo of the Metropolitan Planning Council. Beneath it, in bold font, was a nomination. Francesca Keller Urban Visionary Leadership Award. She looked up at him, stunned. You did this? No, he said. You did. I just made sure the right people saw it. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. I don't need awards. I know, he said, brushing a thumb across her cheek. But you deserve them. She took a breath, overwhelmed and grateful and deeply in love. I want to marry you, she said suddenly. His brows lifted. I'm sorry, was that my line? I'm stealing it. Well, he said, in that case, I accept. They toasted under the stars, no one else around, no applause, no spectacle. Just 2 people who had met by accident and chosen each other every day since. And when they finally married on the rooftop where it all began, Francesca walked toward him in a dress she designed herself, her step steady, her eyes bright. There were no borrowed shoes. No borrowed anything. Everything she had built was hers. And Dominic? He was already waiting, hand outstretched, not to rescue her, but to stand beside her. Forever.